Close your eyes for a moment and let yourself settle into the present. Feel the quiet air around you, like a soft breeze brushing gently against your cheek. Imagine the rustle of leaves just beyond your window, or the comforting glow of a candle's flame swaying in the stillness. Perhaps you hear in your mind the distant crackle of a hearth fire, the kind that invites you to sit back, to breathe slowly, and to listen as stories unfold. Tonight we will journey into the 19th century, into the life of a man who turned laughter into an art form, who poked fun at the mighty and stood shoulder to shoulder with the common folk. A man who became, in many ways, America's very first stand-up comedian, Mark Twain. His name, of course, was not truly Mark Twain. He was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens on November 30th, 1835, in a small two-room house in Florida, Missouri. His arrival was accompanied by a cosmic spectacle. Halley's Comet blazed across the night sky. Later in life, Twain would joke, with his characteristic blend of mischief and prophecy, that he had come in with the comet and expected to go out with it as well. And in a curious twist of fate, he did exactly that, dying in 1910, just one day after Halley's Comet returned. From the very beginning, then, Samuel Clemens seemed destined for a life of legend, laughter, and a little bit of cosmic mischief. His family was large. He was the sixth of 7 children born to John and Jane Clemens, but of those children, only 4 would survive to adulthood. The young boy who would become Mark Twain grew up with an awareness of both joy and sorrow, laughter and loss. His father, John Marshall Clemens, was a stern man, a lawyer and later a storekeeper, who carried dreams of wealth that never quite materialized. His mother, Jane Lambton Clemens, was the warmer presence, a storyteller in her own right, whose humor and kindness left a deep impression on young Sam. In 1839, when Samuel was just 4 years old, the family moved to the bustling river town of Hannibal, Missouri, perched on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River. Hannibal would shape his imagination forever. To a young boy, the river was not merely a body of water. It was alive, a character in itself. The steamboats that churned up and down its wide expanse seemed like floating palaces, filled with adventure and possibility. Around town, Sam found companions, games, and endless mischief. Hannibal became the model for the fictional town of St. Petersburg, the setting of his most beloved tales, including the adventures of Tom Sawyer and adventures of Huckleberry Finn. But behind the charm of Hannibal lay darker realities. Missouri was a slave state, and young Samuel grew up surrounded by the harsh contradictions of American life in the mid-19th century. Enslaved men, women, and children worked in homes and fields, their suffering often ignored by polite society but keenly observed by young eyes. Twain would later reflect on these early impressions, using humor, satire, and biting truth to expose the cruelty of slavery and the hypocrisy of a nation still struggling with its conscience. Tragedy struck when Sam was just 11 years old. His father died of pneumonia in 1847, leaving the family in financial difficulty. To help support his mother and siblings, Sam left school and took an apprenticeship as a printer's apprentice at the Hannibal Courier. He earned little, but the job gave him access to newspapers, books, and most importantly, the written word. He devoured stories, sharpened his wit, and began to write small humorous sketches. Words became his tools, laughter his craft. By the age of 16, Samuel was already working as a typesetter and contributing articles to his brother Orion's newspaper, the Hannibal Journal. These were not grand literary essays, but witty, playful pieces that entertained readers and hinted at the humorist he would become. In the still nights of Hannibal, with the river's mist rising like a curtain, Sam was slowly rehearsing for the stage of the world. Still, his ambitions stretched far beyond Hannibal. In his heart, the river called him, promising adventure, danger, and escape. At 21, Samuel fulfilled that dream by training to become a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi River. This was no small feat. Piloting required not only courage but also near photographic memory of the river's endless bends, currents, and shifting sandbars. The pay was excellent, the prestige high, and to young Samuel, guiding a steamboat was both a challenge and a thrill. It was during these years that he fell in love with the rhythm and language of the river. The shouts of deckhands, the gossip of passengers, the music of steamboat whistles echoing across the water. He gathered stories and characters like treasures. Many of these would later appear in his writing, clothed in exaggeration, wit, and humor. The Mississippi was his stage, his school, and his muse, and it was here on the river that he found the pen name that would make him famous, Mark Twain. The phrase came from riverboat jargon. Mark Twain meant 2 fathoms deep, a safe depth for a steamboat to travel. To a pilot, the words meant security, passage, and steady water. To Samuel Clemens, the words had a ring of familiarity and fun. When he began publishing humorous sketches years later, he adopted Mark Twain as his literary alter ego. The name stuck, and soon, the world would know Samuel Clemens by no other. But his idyllic river life was suddenly interrupted by the Civil War. When war broke out in 1861, steamboat traffic collapsed and Samuel found himself adrift, both literally and figuratively. Briefly, he joined a ragtag Confederate militia, though he lacked both enthusiasm and discipline for the cause. In later years, he poked fun at this episode, describing the group as poorly trained and quickly disbanded. Twain's brief military adventure ended in just 2 weeks, leaving him with more anecdotes than battlefield scars. Looking for new horizons, Samuel followed his brother Orion westward to Nevada, where Orion had been appointed Secretary of the Nevada Territory. The West was wild, filled with prospectors, gamblers, and dreamers. Samuel tried his hand at silver mining but quickly learned he was no miner, yet the rough and tumble towns of Virginia City and later San Francisco gave him endless material for storytelling. Here, amid saloons and newspapers, he honed his voice as a humorist. His wit, sharp, irreverent, and mischievous, fit perfectly in the boomtown atmosphere. In 1863, in Virginia City's territorial enterprise, Samuel Clemens first signed an article as Mark Twain. From that moment forward, the world began to meet the character who would become America's beloved mischief maker, social critic, and comic philosopher. His words sparkled with sarcasm, poked at authority, and drew laughter from readers desperate for relief in a hard, uncertain world. As we reach this point in the story, let us pause. Imagine Hannibal's quiet riverbanks where a barefoot boy dreamed of adventure. Picture the grand steamboats churning up the Mississippi, a young pilot memorizing every bend. See the wild towns of Nevada, where the clatter of miners' picks mixed with the roar of laughter in smoky saloons. In each of these places, Samuel Clemens was gathering the experiences, the characters, and the humor that would define Mark Twain. And so, the stage is set. We have met the boy who would become Twain, seen the river that baptized him, and glimpsed the wit that was already sharpening. But the real show is just beginning. Ahead lies fame, controversy, and a lifetime of words that would make America laugh at itself, even as it grappled with its deepest struggles. As the fire in the hearth fades to embers and the candlelight flickers low, let us drift onward to the next chapter, where Mark Twain's rise to national fame begins, and where the mischievous boy from Missouri takes his place as America's first stand-up storyteller. Take another slow breath and let the world around you soften. Feel the air resting gently against your skin. Hear the faint whisper of night as if the trees themselves are telling old stories. Picture once again that warm glow of a candle, steady and calm, inviting you to relax. With each flicker, the past becomes clearer, and our journey with Mark Twain continues. By the early 1860s, Samuel Clemens, now signing his work as Mark Twain, was finding his stride. He had wandered from riverbanks to mining camps, from the quiet town of Hannibal to the rough frontier of Nevada. But it was in the realm of words, not gold or silver, that he struck his richest vein. His first widely noticed success came in 1865, with the publication of a humorous tale titled The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. This story, printed in the New York Saturday Press, was based on a tall tale Twain had heard in the mining camps of California. It told of a gambler's trick frog, trained to jump higher than any other, at least until a stranger filled it with buckshot and outwitted its owner. The piece was simple, playful, and absurd, but it captured the American spirit of exaggeration and mischief. Readers across the country laughed, and almost overnight, Mark Twain's name became associated with clever, frontier-style humor. The success of the Jumping Frog story propelled Twain into the national spotlight. Newspapers began to publish his sketches, and editors sought him out. His voice was unique, plain-spoken, filled with the rhythms of everyday speech but sharpened by irony and wit. Twain was not trying to sound like an academic or a European intellectual. He sounded like the people, and that authenticity resonated deeply. Around this time, Twain also began his career as a lecturer, what today we might call stand-up performing. Unlike the stiff formal lectures of his day, Twain's appearances were filled with comic timing, storytelling, and improvisation. He would stand before audiences, cigar in hand, and deliver tales with a twinkle in his eye, pausing just long enough for laughter to ripple through the room before continuing with another sly remark. In this way, he wasn't just reading stories, he was performing them. Many historians consider Twain's lecture tours the forerunner of modern American stand-up comedy. One contemporary recalled that Twain never seemed to hurry, but his words dropped like little explosions of amusement, perfectly timed. He had a gift for turning even ordinary observations into moments of laughter. His humor was rooted in truth, sometimes uncomfortable truth, and audiences loved him for it. In 1867, Twain's fame expanded further when he published The Innocents Abroad, his first major travel book. The work grew out of his journey aboard the steamship Quaker City, which carried a group of Americans on a tour of Europe and the Holy Land. Twain wrote about what he saw with equal parts wonder and irreverence. He poked fun at European pretensions, questioned holy relics, and compared the grandeur of old-world monuments with the plain common sense of American life. Readers devoured the book. The Innocents Abroad became one of the best-selling travel books of the 19th century. Americans loved Twain's honesty. He was saying what many of them thought but never dared to put into print. To a nation still young, unsure of its cultural standing next to Europe, Twain's voice was empowering. He celebrated American plainness over European polish, humor over pomp, and common sense over elitism. Behind this growing fame was also a man wrestling with his own ambitions. Twain was restless, always seeking new adventures, new audiences, and new ways to provoke laughter. He toured as a lecturer across America, and later abroad, where his reputation spread even further. His tall tales and sharp observations made him a celebrity, a distinctly American celebrity, unpolished yet brilliant, irreverent yet wise. Amid this whirlwind of success, Twain's personal life was changing too. In 1870, he married Olivia Langdon, known as Livy, the daughter of a wealthy New York coal magnate. Their courtship was tender and filled with letters, where Twain's humor mingled with earnest affection. Olivia was refined, religious, and cautious, quite different from Twain's mischievous personality, but together they balanced one another. She softened some of his rough edges, and he brought laughter and vitality into her life. The couple settled in Hartford, Connecticut, in a grand house that would later become a landmark of American literature. There, Twain wrote some of his most enduring works, supported by Livy's steady presence and their growing family. They would have 4 children. Though heartbreak struck as only one, Clara survived to adulthood. Twain's life was often marked by such contrasts: public success and private sorrow, laughter shared with the world and grief carried in silence. By the 1870s, Twain was no longer just a regional humorist. He was a national figure. His lectures filled halls from New England to California. His books were read in parlors and on front porches, their pages passed from hand to hand. He embodied something uniquely American, a democratic wit, a refusal to bow before the pretentious, and a willingness to laugh at himself as much as at anyone else. But what made Twain more than just a jokester was his ability to blend humor with truth. His jokes were not empty. They carried barbs of social commentary. In The Innocents Abroad, when he described Americans pocketing sacred relics or mocking European customs, he was highlighting cultural differences, yes, but also questioning arrogance, ignorance, and hypocrisy on both sides of the Atlantic. His humor was a mirror, reflecting society back to itself with a crooked smile. Twain's rising career coincided with a changing America. The Civil War was over, but its scars remained. The country was expanding westward, cities were growing, and industrialization was reshaping everyday life. Amid all this, Twain gave voice to both the excitement and the unease of the era. He told stories that felt familiar, of mischievous boys, riverboats, and frontier towns, but through those stories, he invited Americans to laugh at their own contradictions. As we leave this stage of Twain's life, imagine the scene: a crowded lecture hall in Boston, lamps glowing softly, the audience leaning forward in anticipation. Mark Twain, cigar in hand, steps to the podium. His hair is already wild, his mustache unruly, his eyes sparkling with mischief. He begins to speak, not in lofty, distant tones, but as though he were chatting with friends in a tavern. Laughter erupts, pauses, then erupts again. This is not just writing. This is performance. This is comedy. This is America discovering its own voice through him. Twain's fame was secured, but the greatest chapters of his writing career still lay ahead. Soon he would give the world The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, books that would not only make readers laugh but also challenge them to think about freedom, morality, and the tangled heart of America itself. For now, let the glow of the candle fade gently as we prepare to journey deeper into Twain's story. From a boy on the Mississippi to a rising national humorist, his mischief had only just begun. Ahead lies his golden era of creativity, where childhood adventures and biting satire would make him one of the greatest storytellers of all time. Settle back once more and let your breath grow even. Picture the quiet rustle of leaves outside or the slow, steady sound of a river at night, rippling gently under moonlight. Imagine sitting by a warm hearth, where shadows dance against the wall as if they too are listening to the story unfold. This is the perfect setting to meet two of the most mischievous boys in American literature, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. By the mid-1870s, Mark Twain had already made his name as a humorist and lecturer. But it was in 1876, with the publication of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, that he etched his place in literary history. Tom Sawyer was not just a character. He was a mirror of Twain's own boyhood in Hannibal, Missouri. The novel painted a vivid picture of small-town life along the Mississippi River, filled with games, adventures, tricks, and trouble. Readers were instantly captivated. Tom was clever, mischievous, sometimes selfish, sometimes noble, an all-American boy who dreamed of pirates and treasure, who tricked others into doing his chores, and who stumbled, half by accident and half by bravery, into acts of heroism. Twain's storytelling brought childhood to life with a mixture of nostalgia and humor. He reminded adults of their own youthful schemes and gave children a hero who felt alive, not polished or perfect, but real. One of the most famous scenes, of course, is the whitewashing of the fence. Tom, sentenced to paint a fence as punishment, turns the task into a privilege, convincing his friends to beg for the chance to do it. Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day? He asks slyly. In that single scene, Twain captured the eternal spirit of boyish mischief and human nature's gullibility. The episode is funny, yes, but also insightful. It shows how cleverness, persuasion, and performance can turn drudgery into opportunity. But Twain was not content to simply entertain. Beneath the laughter, Tom Sawyer touched on darker themes: poverty, violence, superstition, and death. The murder in the graveyard, the fear of Injun Joe, the trials of Becky Thatcher, these elements gave the novel depth. It was not just a children's book, but a book about childhood, filled with both joy and danger. Twain understood that mischief was never far from risk, and that growing up meant walking the line between innocence and reality. Then, in 1884, Twain delivered what many consider his masterpiece, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. If Tom Sawyer was about the carefree mischief of youth, Huck Finn was about freedom, morality, and the struggle of conscience in a divided America. Huck, the ragged, free-spirited boy, flees from his abusive father and floats down the Mississippi River on a raft. With him is Jim, an enslaved man seeking freedom. On the surface, the novel is a grand adventure, two companions drifting through river towns, facing robbers, tricksters, and storms. But beneath the adventure lies a bold critique of slavery, racism, and hypocrisy. Twain wrote in the voice of Huck himself, plain and unpolished, using dialects that brought authenticity but also controversy. Huck tells the story not as a polished narrator, but as a boy trying to make sense of a world filled with contradictions. The heart of the book is Huck's moral struggle. At one point, Huck believes he is committing a sin by helping Jim escape. Society had taught him that slavery was right and helping a runaway was wrong. Huck nearly decides to turn Jim in, but in a moment of courage, he declares, "All right then, I'll go to hell." With those words, Twain captured the essence of moral growth, not obedience to unjust laws, but the choice to follow one's conscience, even at great cost. The novel's humor, too, is biting. The feuding Grangerfords and Shepherdsons, locked in a senseless, violent rivalry, satirize the absurdity of inherited hatreds. The Duke and the King, Two con men who swindle entire towns, lampoon gullibility and greed. And through Huck's innocent observations, Twain exposes the hypocrisy of adults who preach morality but practice cruelty. Not everyone, however, welcomed the book. Upon its release, some critics condemned it as coarse, even vulgar. Others dismissed its use of dialect as unrefined. In fact, the Concord Public Library banned it outright in 1885, calling it trash and suitable only for the slums. Yet the very qualities critics disliked, its raw honesty, its use of ordinary speech, its refusal to romanticize, are what made it revolutionary. Twain had given voice to the voiceless, and in doing so he pushed American literature into new, uncharted waters. Despite the controversy, Huckleberry Finn would go on to be hailed as one of the greatest novels ever written. Ernest Hemingway later declared, "All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn." For Twain, the book was both a triumph and a burden. It brought him lasting fame, but it also tied him to debates about race, morality, and censorship that continue to this day. At home in Hartford, Twain's life seemed blessed. He and Olivia entertained literary giants like Harriet Beecher Stowe and William Dean Howells. Their house rang with laughter and conversation. Twain would work late into the night, cigar smoke curling around him as he wrote stories filled with wit and wisdom. His daughters filled the halls with music and play. Outwardly, it was a golden age, but even in these years of success, Twain wrestled with challenges. His restless humor often masked deeper anxieties. He worried about money, about his reputation, about the future of America. His wit was both a shield and a sword, protecting him from despair and cutting into the hypocrisies he saw all around him. Still, Twain was at the height of his powers. He had transformed from a mischievous boy on the riverbanks to a man who made the world laugh, think, and question. His pen carried the rhythms of the Mississippi, the mischief of childhood, and the conscience of a nation still learning what freedom truly meant. As we leave this chapter, picture once again that raft drifting down the wide Mississippi, the stars above shining like lanterns in the dark. Huck lies back, listening to the water slap against the logs while Jim dreams quietly of freedom. Twain gave us that image, not just of a journey down a river, but of a nation on a journey with itself. And so, with Huck and Jim floating into the distance, we drift to Twain's next great adventures, his fame on the world stage, his triumphs and his trials as the mischievous humorist became a global icon. Let us begin again with slow breaths. Picture the steady rise and fall of your chest, the sound of air flowing gently like waves lapping at the shore. Now imagine the glow of gaslight in a crowded theater hall, where hundreds of faces look forward in eager anticipation. The curtains part and a tall, wild-haired man steps onto the stage, cigar in hand, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Before he even speaks, the room is alive with expectation. This was Mark Twain, not only a writer but one of the greatest performers of his age. By the 1870s and 1880s, Twain was more than just an American author. He was a global celebrity. His books were translated across Europe, his lectures sold out theaters, and his name carried with it the promise of laughter, wit, and a touch of irreverence. Unlike many writers of his time, Twain understood performance. He didn't simply read from his works. He delivered them like a comedian, pacing the stage, pausing for effect, raising an eyebrow at just the right moment. His timing was perfect, his presence magnetic. Some called him the first stand-up comedian long before the term existed. Twain's lecture tours were grueling but wildly successful. In America, he traveled by train and steamboat, speaking in towns large and small. Audiences roared with laughter at his satirical stories, his sharp commentary, and his playful exaggerations. In one lecture, he might mock the absurdity of politics. In another, he might recount a misadventure from his travels. His delivery made every tale sound spontaneous, though he had carefully rehearsed each pause and punchline. But Twain's fame was not confined to America. In 1872, he published Roughing It, chronicling his adventures in the American West. In 1880, A Tramp Abroad captured his European wanderings with a mixture of awe and ridicule. And in 1889, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court transported his humor into medieval England, satirizing both chivalry and modern society. Each book widened his audience, proving that Twain's mischief translated across borders. Then came his world lecture tour of 1895-1896, one of the most ambitious journeys any author had ever attempted. Twain traveled across the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and England, performing for enormous crowds. In Australia, he spoke to packed halls, calling the country the most beautiful land I have ever seen. In India, he marveled at the chaos and color of life, describing it with his trademark blend of fascination and satire. Everywhere he went, audiences adored him. Twain was not just an American humorist, he was a citizen of the world, bringing laughter wherever he traveled. Behind the stage lights, however, Twain's life was less secure. Despite his fame, he was plagued by financial troubles. His investments often failed, most notoriously his backing of the page typesetting machine, a complicated contraption meant to revolutionize printing. Twain poured a fortune into it, but the machine was unreliable and soon obsolete. By the early 1890s, Twain was facing bankruptcy. It was this financial disaster that partly motivated his world tour. The lectures were not only about entertaining audiences, but also about repaying debts. Twain refused to declare bankruptcy, insisting instead on paying back every creditor in full even though the law excused him. This decision won him admiration worldwide, showing that beneath his mischief and satire was a man of deep principle. Still, on stage, Twain never let his worries show. His audiences saw only the confident humorist, the quick wit, the mischievous storyteller. They did not see the private man who fretted over bills late into the night, or the father who worried for his family's comfort. Twain wore humor as both a crown and a mask. It made him beloved, but it also hid his pain. At home, he enjoyed the life of a celebrity. The Twains' Hartford mansion became a gathering place for artists, politicians, and intellectuals. The family was stylish and admired, their home filled with laughter and culture. Twain himself became a symbol of American wit and independence, a man who spoke boldly against hypocrisy, corruption, and injustice. And yet, even as he rose to global fame, he never lost the mischievous twinkle in his eye. Reporters flocked to him for quotes, knowing he would say something outrageous. He once quipped, "I have never let my schooling interfere with my education." On another occasion, when asked if he believed in infant baptism, he replied, "Believe in it? Why, I've seen it done." His humor was sharp but never cruel, irreverent but never empty. He had the rare gift of making people laugh while making them think. By the late 1880s and early 1890s, Twain was at the height of his fame. He had traveled the globe, published bestsellers, and become a household name. His mustache and white suit were instantly recognizable, his words quoted in newspapers and parlors alike. To the world, he seemed untouchable, the very embodiment of success. But beneath the laughter, storm clouds gathered. Twain's finances remained fragile, his health sometimes uncertain, and tragedy loomed within his family. The mischievous humorist who had conquered the world would soon face heartbreaks that no joke could soften. For now, however, let us leave him in the spotlight, standing before a roaring crowd somewhere in London or Melbourne, cigar smoke curling through the gaslight. The audience laughs until their sides ache, but Twain, with his sly grin, already has another joke ready. For this was Mark Twain at his peak, the boy from the Mississippi who had made the entire world his stage. Before we step into the heavier years of Mark Twain's life, let's pause. Imagine the glow of a single candle in a quiet room. The flame dances but holds steady, casting long shadows on the walls. It is a comforting sight, fragile yet enduring. In many ways, Twain's humor was like that candle. It flickered against the winds of tragedy and failure, but it never went out. By the late 1880s, Twain's fame was greater than ever, but so too were his burdens. Though he was celebrated across continents, his finances were a disaster. Much of his fortune had vanished in failed investments. The greatest loss came from his obsession with the page typesetting machine, a brilliant but fatally flawed invention. Twain believed it would transform the printing industry, making typesetting faster and more efficient. He poured over $300,000, a staggering sum in those days, into the machine. But progress can be cruel. Even as Twain clung to the page machine, new technologies like the linotype quickly surpassed it. The page was too complex, too delicate, too costly to succeed. What Twain had thought would secure his fortune instead drained it. By 1894, he was deeply in debt, owing the equivalent of millions today. Bankruptcy loomed. Yet Twain's pride would not let him escape responsibility. In his own words, he insisted, "I am not going to shirk my debts." I will pay them if it kills me. This stubborn integrity became both a burden and a badge of honor. To repay his creditors, Twain embarked on what would become one of the most grueling chapters of his life, the around-the-world lecture tour of 1895-1896. Alongside his wife Olivia and daughter Clara, he set out to entertain audiences from Canada to Australia, India to South Africa, England to New Zealand. Crowds packed the halls. Some came for the humor, some for the legend, others simply for the chance to say they had seen Mark Twain in person. Night after night, Twain performed. His voice carried stories of the Mississippi, of miners in Nevada, of foolish travelers abroad. The laughter rolled in like waves. Yet offstage, his health faltered, his spirits flagged, and he longed for home. Audiences never saw the weariness in his bones, the stress of travel, the pressure of knowing his family's survival depended on each ticket sold. Through sheer willpower, Twain raised enough money to repay his debts. By 1898, every creditor had been paid in full. Newspapers hailed him as a hero of honor, and his reputation soared even higher. But the cost was immense, not just financial but emotional. And then came the grief. Twain's personal life was marked by devastating loss. His eldest daughter, Susie, a gifted writer with a bright future, fell ill with meningitis in 1896 while Twain was still abroad. She died at just 24 years old. Twain, thousands of miles away, received the news in horror. He later wrote that no blow in his life had ever struck him so deeply. Susie's death left a wound that never truly healed. His beloved wife, Olivia, whom he called Livy, was his anchor, his moral compass, his quiet strength. But by the early 1900s, her health declined sharply. Twain did everything he could to ease her suffering, moving the family to Italy in hopes of warmer air, seeking doctors, praying for recovery. Still, in 1904, Olivia passed away. Twain was inconsolable. He described her absence as though the sun had set in my world and would never rise again. 2 more heartbreaks followed. His daughter Jean, long plagued by epilepsy, died suddenly in 1909 at the age of 29. Earlier, in 1896, his infant son Langdon had also died. By the end of his life, Twain had buried 3 of his 4 children. Only Clara survived him. It is easy, when we picture Mark Twain, the cigar, the white suit, the booming laughter, to forget the man beneath. Behind the humor was grief so heavy it sometimes threatened to crush him. He once wrote in a private letter, "I am so lonesome I could die." And yet, through all this sorrow, Twain still made the world laugh. Humor became his shield, his coping mechanism, his way of enduring the unbearable. He once confessed, "The secret source of humor is not joy but sorrow. There is no humor in heaven." That line, perhaps more than any other, reveals the heart of Mark Twain. His comedy sprang from pain, his jokes were sharpened by loss, his laughter was the sound of survival. Twain's later works reflected this darker edge. The Mysterious Stranger, a posthumously published novella, carried biting satire about mankind's cruelty and meaninglessness. His essays grew sharper, more cynical, targeting politics, imperialism, and the hypocrisies of religion. His wit still dazzled, but it was edged with melancholy. Even his public image changed. In his last years, Twain adopted the white suit as his trademark, wearing it year-round, even in winter. He claimed he did it because it was a good advertisement, but many suspected it was also a kind of armor, a way of turning himself into a living symbol, larger than the grief-stricken man inside. By the early 1900s, Twain had become more than a humorist. He was a sage, a cultural critic, a beloved but weathered national treasure. The mischievous boy from Hannibal, the wandering printer, the steamboat pilot, the Nevada prospector, the worldwide lecturer. He had lived many lives. And yet sorrow and laughter always traveled together in his story. As he entered his final decade, Twain's humor grew sharper, but also more reflective. He had seen the heights of fame and the depths of despair. He had been celebrated across the world and left alone in his grief. And still, with cigar in hand and a mischievous grin, he kept telling stories because for Twain, storytelling was not just a career. It was survival. The stage lights were beginning to dim, but the show was not over yet. The world still looked to him for laughter, and Twain, though weary, still had mischief left to share. Take a moment to imagine dusk settling across a quiet porch. A lantern glows softly. Moths flutter in the warm evening air and the world seems slower, gentler. This is where we find Mark Twain in his later years, not rushing through the vigor of youth or the excitement of discovery, but reflecting with equal parts mischief and melancholy on the world he had witnessed. By the early 1900s, Samuel Clemens, known to all as Mark Twain, had become something greater than an author or humorist. He was an American institution. Newspapers printed his every remark. Reporters followed him eagerly, hoping for a witty line to splash across the front page. His white suit, which he began wearing in his later life, made him instantly recognizable. Wherever he went, people stopped and stared. The shock of white hair, the grand mustache, the cigar, and the suit as bright as fresh snow. Twain had become not just a writer but a symbol of wit, independence, and plain-spoken truth. In these final years, his humor carried sharper edges. The mischievous boy from Hannibal had grown into an old man who had seen much of life's pain. He joked, yes, but often with a bitterness born of loss and disillusionment. He criticized politicians, mocked imperialism, and skewered human hypocrisy with words that still sting today. One of his fiercest targets was American imperialism. Twain had once believed in the promise of American progress, but by the turn of the century, he was horrified by his nation's expansionist wars. The annexation of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War in 1898 stirred his anger. He joined the Anti-Imperialist League and used his pen to fight what he saw as America's betrayal of its own democratic ideals. He wrote, "I am an anti-imperialist. I am opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land." In essays and speeches, he used his trademark wit to expose the cruelty of war and colonialism. His satire spared no one, neither governments nor kings, neither generals nor clergymen. While his humor made people laugh, it also made them uncomfortable, forcing them to confront ugly truths. Twain was no longer just America's joker. He was its conscience. Religion, too, came under his sharp eye. Though he had been raised in a religious household, Twain's later writings revealed a deep skepticism. He saw too much suffering in the world, too many injustices carried out in the name of faith. His unpublished works, such as Letters from the Earth, offered biting critiques of organized religion, questioning the logic of doctrines and the morality of a God who allowed so much pain. To some, these writings were shocking. To others, they showed a mind unafraid to wrestle with the hardest questions. Yet for all his cynicism, Twain still held on to kindness. He delighted in the company of children, often entertaining the daughters of friends with stories and jokes. They adored the white-haired man with the booming laugh who seemed to carry a boy's spirit inside him. And in public, Twain still had the ability to charm a crowd. His lectures, though fewer in number, were as sharp as ever. People loved him not only for his humor but also for his honesty. But age and grief weighed heavily on him. The deaths of his wife Olivia in 1904 and his daughter Jean in 1909 left Twain deeply lonely. His surviving daughter Clara cared for him, but the losses haunted him. He sometimes retreated into silence, other times into dark reflections about life's futility. In these moments, his humor seemed less like a performance and more like a lifeline, keeping despair at bay. Despite his sorrow, Twain remained a figure of fascination. In 1907, he traveled to England, where Oxford University awarded him an honorary doctorate in letters. Dressed, of course, in his white suit, he received the honor with great pride. Even across the Atlantic, he was celebrated as one of the world's great men of letters. That same year, Twain moved into a grand home in Reading, Connecticut, which he named Stormfield. There, he spent his final years surrounded by books, visitors, and the occasional burst of laughter. Stormfield became both a refuge and a stage. Friends, journalists, and admirers came to see the legend in his twilight. Twain entertained them with his usual wit, though his eyes often betrayed the weight of his grief. His final public writings and speeches showed a man grappling openly with mortality. He once remarked, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time." For Twain, death was not something to dread but to mock, another absurdity in the grand human comedy. By 1909, his health was failing. He suffered from heart disease, growing weaker with each passing month. Yet even then, his humor never left him. He quipped to friends, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. "It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." It was true. Mark Twain had been born in 1835, just 2 weeks after Halley's Comet lit up the sky. And in April 1910, as the comet returned, Twain's health collapsed. On April 21st, he died at the age of 74. The boy from the Mississippi was gone, but his words, his laughter, and his mischief lived on. The world mourned him. Newspapers across America and beyond printed glowing tributes. One editorial declared, "Mark Twain gave pleasure, real intellectual enjoyment, to millions, and his works will continue to give such pleasure to millions yet unborn." His funeral was held in New York City, and he was laid to rest beside his family in Elmira, New York. The mischievous boy who had once dreamed of being a riverboat pilot had traveled the world, conquered literature, and shaped humor itself. But Twain's death was not the end of his story. His books continued to sell, his quotes continued to circulate, and his spirit of irreverence inspired generations of writers, comedians, and truth-tellers. In many ways, Mark Twain had outwitted even death. As the lantern on that quiet porch finally flickers out, we see Twain's legacy burning bright, like Halley's Comet, blazing across the sky every century, a reminder that wit, laughter, and courage can leave trails of light long after a life has ended. Take another breath and let it out slowly. Picture yourself by a hearth, the fire crackling gently, casting a warm glow across old books stacked on a wooden table. Their spines are worn, their pages yellowed, but their words remain alive, ready to speak to anyone who opens them. This is Mark Twain's legacy, still whispering, still laughing, still teaching long after he laid down his pen. Mark Twain's death in 1910 was not an ending but a beginning of sorts. His works became cornerstones of American literature, shaping the way generations would think about storytelling, humor, and the nation itself. Few writers have captured the American spirit as he did. Twain was not merely a novelist. He was a voice of the people, sharp enough to mock power, warm enough to touch hearts, mischievous enough to make even serious truths bearable. At the heart of his legacy is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a book that remains both beloved and controversial. Ernest Hemingway once declared, "All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn." Why such a bold statement? Because Twain gave the world a new kind of voice, unpolished, authentic, rooted in the rhythms of everyday speech. Huck's narration broke away from formal English storytelling. It was raw, human, and distinctly American. Through Huck's eyes, Twain explored themes of freedom, morality, and the deep scars of slavery. The novel's depiction of Huck and Jim floating down the Mississippi became a metaphor for America itself, a nation adrift, searching for its conscience. Though debated for its language and portrayal of race, Huckleberry Finn continues to force readers to confront uncomfortable truths, just as Twain intended. Beyond Huck, Twain's legacy is visible in countless writers who followed. William Faulkner, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ralph Ellison, Toni Morrison, all owed something to Twain's groundbreaking style. He showed that literature could be both funny and profound, both local and universal. He proved that America did not need to imitate Europe's literary traditions. It could speak in its own voice. But Twain's influence was not confined to literature. He is often called America's first stand-up comedian. Long before microphones and comedy clubs, Twain perfected the art of making people laugh with timing, delivery, and wit. His lecture tours were a template for what would later become modern stand-up comedy. The way he worked a crowd, building anticipation, delivering punchlines, pausing for effect, all of it feels strikingly familiar today. You can hear Twain's echoes in comedians like Will Rogers, who carried his down-to-earth humor into the 20th century, or in George Carlin, whose sharp social critiques were delivered with Twain-like precision. Even today's late-night hosts and satirists, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, John Oliver, owe a debt to Twain's blend of humor and truth-telling. Twain proved that comedy could be more than entertainment. It could be a weapon, a mirror, a spark for change. His quotes remain some of the most shared words in the English language. Lines like, "The secret of getting ahead is getting started," or, "It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog," pop up in classrooms, speeches, and motivational posters. Many people who have never read a page of his book still know his words. proof of how deeply his wit has seeped into culture. And yet, Twain's legacy is not just about humor or style. It is about honesty. He spoke truths others were afraid to say. He laughed at emperors, questioned churches, mocked tycoons, and exposed hypocrisy wherever he saw it. In a nation that often struggled with its own contradictions, Twain's voice cut through with clarity. He gave Americans permission to laugh at themselves, but also to think deeply about what kind of nation they wanted to be. Twain also helped define the myth of the Mississippi River. To this day, when people picture that mighty river, they often see it through Twain's eyes. The steamboats, the drifting rafts, the muddy waters glinting in the sun. His stories turned the river into more than geography. It became a symbol of adventure, freedom, and the restless American spirit. Educationally, Twain has been a fixture in classrooms for more than a century. His works, though sometimes controversial, are studied for their style, themes, and historical insight. Teachers use Huck and Tom not just to teach literature, but to spark discussions about race, morality, and growing up. In this way, Twain continues to educate, to provoke, to inspire debate. And what of Twain the man? His image, the white suit, the cigar, the wild hair, remains iconic. He is instantly recognizable, like Lincoln or Washington. Statues of him stand in parks. His childhood home in Hannibal, Missouri, has become a museum, and his Hartford mansion welcomes visitors who want to step inside the world he created. Twain himself, ever playful, might have chuckled at this, knowing that the mischievous boy who once skipped school to watch steamboats would one day be cast in bronze. Internationally, Twain's influence is just as strong. His books are translated into dozens of languages. His humor, though born of American soil, resonates across cultures. He showed that laughter is universal, that wit can cross oceans. In India, Russia, Japan, and beyond, readers still find delight in his irreverence. In the United States, Twain embodies something unique, the marriage of humor and democracy. He spoke not from ivory towers, but from the perspective of common life. His jokes came from riverboats, small towns, saloons, and lecture halls. His humor, like America itself, was brash, unrefined, and unafraid to poke fun at anyone in power. In many ways, Twain helped define the American dream, not as wealth or status, but as the freedom to speak truth with a smile. His legacy is also deeply human. He was no saint. He made poor investments, struggled with bitterness, and carried deep grief. Yet perhaps this is why his legacy endures. Twain was real, flawed, funny, brilliant, and wounded. People see themselves in him and in his ability to laugh through the pain. As one critic once said, Mark Twain was the Lincoln of our literature. He freed the American language. And in freeing it, he gave it mischief, vitality, and honesty that still shapes us today. Now, as we near the end of Twain's story, let us return to that crackling hearth. The books on the table may grow older, but their words do not fade. Mark Twain's voice still leaps from the page, teasing, questioning, laughing. He may have died with Halley's Comet, but in truth, Twain never left. His spirit lingers in every classroom, every comedy stage, every moment when laughter cuts through sorrow. Close your eyes again if you wish and listen as we bring this story to its gentle end. Imagine yourself sitting by that quiet hearth, the fire dimmed but still glowing, the last sparks rising into the chimney. Outside the night deepens. The river, Twain's beloved Mississippi, flows endlessly on, silver in the moonlight. It is a fitting image, for Mark Twain's life was itself a river, winding, unpredictable, sometimes calm, sometimes wild, but always moving forward. By the early 20th century, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, known to the world as Mark Twain, was both a national treasure and a man who had lived through extraordinary personal loss. He had buried his wife, Olivia. He had buried 3 of his 4 children. Those losses etched deep lines into his face and left him with a permanent air of melancholy. Even as he continued to make others laugh, Twain once remarked, "The secret source of humor is not joy but sorrow." He understood that humor was not merely entertainment, but a way of confronting the hardest parts of life. Through wit, satire, and storytelling, he helped Americans laugh at themselves while also facing uncomfortable truths. The sage of Stormfield in his final years, Twain lived at a house he named Stormfield in Redding, Connecticut. There, the once restless traveler found a measure of peace. He received visitors from around the world, writers, politicians, scientists, and ordinary admirers, who wanted to meet the man whose words had touched them. He would greet them in his famous white suit, an image that became almost iconic in American culture. Yet Twain was never merely a relic of the past. He remained engaged with the issues of his day. He criticized imperialism, railed against corruption, and stood firmly for freedom of thought. His essays and speeches from these years are sharp, biting, and filled with the same fiery wit of his youth. Age had not dulled him, it had only deepened his perspective. In 1909, Twain famously quipped, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." He was right. On April 21, 1910, just one day after the comet's closest approach, Mark Twain died at the age of 74. His death was mourned across America and the world. Newspapers ran headlines not merely announcing the passing of a famous author, but the departure of a national voice. It felt as if the nation had lost its conscience, its jester, and its philosopher all at once. Legacy of laughter and truth. So, what is Mark Twain's place in American history? He was more than a humorist, more than a novelist, more than a lecturer. He was in many ways America's first stand-up comedian, using wit, timing, and live performance to hold up a mirror to his countrymen. He drew laughter, yes, but also reflection. His jokes always carried a point, a sting, a truth. He gave us Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, immortal characters who continue to leap from the page with life and mischief. He captured the rhythms of the Mississippi, the dialects of everyday people, the adventures and contradictions of a young America. And through his own life, through his failures and triumphs, he embodied the restless spirit of the American dream. Twain showed that humor could be serious business. It could challenge injustice, expose hypocrisy, and speak for the voiceless. In this sense, he was indeed America's first stand-up, blazing a trail for generations of comedians and writers who would follow. The mischief lives on today. More than a century after his death, Twain's words remain alive. Students still study Huckleberry Finn. Audiences still laugh at his quips. Comedians still borrow from his sharp style. And readers from Missouri to New York to far beyond America's shores still feel the same warmth, wit, and wisdom that made him famous. Mark Twain once said, "Against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand." Perhaps that is why we continue to return to him. In times of struggle, in moments of darkness, his humor lights a candle. His stories remind us of our shared humanity, and his mischievous grin, forever caught in old photographs, seems to reassure us that no matter how serious life may become, it is never beyond a good laugh. Closing reflection is now, as this journey through his life comes to an end, let us sit once more by the river in our imagination. The night air is cool. The breeze carries the scent of water and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a paddle steamer sounds its whistle, echoing across the water. And perhaps, if we listen closely, we can almost hear Twain himself chuckling, spinning another tale, ready to make us laugh, ready to make us think. The mischief, it seems, will never truly end. Thank you for staying with this story, The Mischievous Life of Mark Twain, America's first stand-up. May his humor linger with you, soft as the rustle of leaves, bright as a candle flame, steady as the river's flow. And now, dear listener, rest well, for history itself has whispered to you tonight.